So they announced Friday at 3:05 that, we're going to expand to 12. I found it interesting, maybe you did too, that Mike Slive in his comments to Paul Feinbaum said,
R.I.P.
Yeah.
Greg Sankey.
What did I call Mike Slive? My fault.
Yeah, okay.
My fault. Mike Slive might have said the same thing. Greg Sankey, in his comments to Paul Feinbaum, said, yeah, it's the same deal we had a year ago. I don't know why we didn't do it. Did you find that as kind of sneaky, funny as I did?
Well, I mean, Greg Sankey's the one who is extremely hurt and feels like he got stabbed in the back by other conference commissioners
really?
Who tried to torpedo the efforts to get this expansion through in time so that it could be expanded early. Of course, we've discussed the other motives here, which include that the Big Ten, which no longer is going to have a relationship with ESPN in the future, did not want to expand in a way where ESPN was going to be able to lock up the ability to not only air all of these games and make all the money, but also be the sole place where you can find the college football playoff discussion to drive the narrative, to be able to be the owner of college football. Big Ten wants to open that up, and for lots of reasons, including that as the NFL will tell you, when you have multiple media partners, you can make more money off of this.
There's no doubt. I think the only real reason that we didn't expand last year is because the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Pac-12 were mad at the SEC. They're just flat out mad. If nothing changed, then there's really no reason, because they voted to expand, and they also said, well, we'd love to do it before sooner rather than later. Well, ESPN still has the contract. So if you don't wait until after a certain period of time, then ESPN's exclusive negotiating window is still in place, although we'll talk about that in a minute. There's a bunch of things that they list as concerns. And by the way, shout out to the liar who's the president of Mississippi State. Was it Mark Keenum, for trying to tell us that revenue was not the driver here?
Yeah, revenue was the driver. But to your point, the commissioners are mad at each other. This was unanimously voted through by the presidents. This was university presidents getting together and telling the children in their eyes to stop infighting. Right. And you all go figure it out. I'm going to lock this door, and until you all figure it out, nobody's coming out. And that's what they're doing to the conference commissioners with the unanimous approval of a 12-team model that was already established. Yeah. Now they are tasking them with getting all the details ironed out.
Figure it out. Before we get to what is or isn't important, the way I look at this, it probably pumps the brakes on the destruction, the demolition of what we see as the Power Five.
Because, without a doubt.
I mean, I think it, like, if anything solved that, it's probably this. So, because there'll be access.
7 to 8 years from now, we'll revisit this and things will be a little bit more tense. But that was one of my very first takes on Friday. I was like, okay, well, if you're going to introduce a new championship format where there are 6 automatic bids for conference champions, there is less motivation to consolidate the entire sport into 2 conferences. As long as that is the format in place, then someone in the ACC, someone in the Big 12, someone in the Pac-12, if your goal is to win a lot of games and then get to go compete for a national championship, this format says, why don't you stay here where there are less traditional powers who are spending less money and getting less money, and you can be the big fish in what will be a smaller pond, but then you still get your crack at it. You get the access. I mean, this is great news for the Sun Belt. This is great news for the American Athletic Conference. This is preserving as much of the current FBS landscape as you could possibly imagine. It definitely it pumps the brakes, slows conference realignment in the short term. And given how much college football has changed in the last 8 years, who knows what it looks like, 8 years from now, once we get a little bit further down the line.
All right. So there's 5 or 6 different areas that need to be ironed out. The calendar. Do you see the calendar as being a real problem? Because I feel like it isn't.
So I was under the impression that we would look at the college football playoff would be following somewhat of the same schedule as the bowl schedule, but maybe starting a week earlier, where we might have, like, they said that they would respect the Army Navy time slot,
Right.
but you could have a game at 12 and then you could have a primetime game.
Yeah.
And the Army Navy game could be right there in the middle. So we would come out of conference championships into first round of the playoffs. Next weekend, you would have your quarterfinals. New Year's Eve, you'd have your semifinals. And then your national championship would still be in that same traditional spot on a Monday in early January. That is my impression. Now, that is extremely taxing for the team that plays in a conference championship, does not get a bye, and then has to turn around and play a first-round game the next weekend, then potentially make it all the way to a national championship. I don't think there will be very many of those teams.
No, I agree.
But that is one thing that I think if you want to draw some concerns about the calendar, it's a lot of football without much of a break for the teams that would be in that position. Again, you have to play in a conference championship game, not be one of the top 4 conference champions, and then go on and have a bid to the first round.
Right, but we have already established, because we know this, that the powers that be that are taking in all this money don't really care about the fact that their players have to play so many games. Otherwise, if they did, we wouldn't be at this point, because they play 12, and most of the time they play every week, every other week anyway, or every weekend anyway. But to that end, chances that the players will share a significant amount of the revenue. I'm not saying players will split half of the revenue, but that the players will be compensated for this.
Not high for the college football playoff. You've got a better chance of seeing that with a conference being able to do a revenue sharing agreement with its players based on their media rights than I think the college football playoff as an entire body is going to be able to have with the players themselves. And that was something that, honestly, I had not brought up in any of these conversations. And when it was presented to me, it seemed to make the most sense, because we do a lot of hand-wringing about the schools sharing some of the media rights revenue with players and what that would mean on so many different levels within the university community. But if it's the conferences, it seems like that answers a lot of questions, but we're still not there yet, no matter what Kevin Warren says to try and look good when he's on HBO Sports.
Right, especially in front of Brian Gumbel. All right, so I think there will be revenue sharing with players who participate in these games, because I think there has to be, because if there isn't, then it's just, I mean, not to quote Phil Mickelson here, but it's obnoxious greed on the part of the administrators if the players who play are not compensated further. And I've said this before, I believe that there will be opt-outs even from playoff games for teams that are seeded like 13. I think there will be opt-outs. All right, let me ask you a couple of other quick things before we have to. Really, just one thing before I ask you the Rory McIlroy thing. The media rights thing, I think we can agree, is probably going to have to open beforehand, and I think ultimately it'll be Fox gets part and ESPN gets part, and they'll flip back and forth, or maybe one will pay a little more and they'll always get the title game, sort of like the in a way the CBS Turner NCAA tournament. Is that a fair guess at what's going to happen here?
No idea. Truly no idea.
Okay.
Well, where are you at with the schedule? Because I think there's no way you go deeper into January, and I think that the
I agree. I think it's that part of the schedule stays the same.
Yeah,
that part of the schedule stays the same. And I think you were right. Quarterfinals will be about 2 weeks before the semifinals, which will be right around the first of the year, and the quarterfinals will be the New Year's 6 games that aren't the semifinals, because there's 4 of those. We understand. All right, revenue distribution. I read your colleague Dennis Dodd's piece today on CBSSports.com. Is the ACC, and I realize that they have no leg to stand on here, but is the ACC really going to stand for the Big Ten and the SEC splitting half and the ACC, Big 12, and Pac-12 splitting 30%? Are we headed to that distribution, or should it be, which might work out the same way, more merit-based? So, look, if the SEC has 4 of the 12, then you get more money. Shouldn't it sort of be that way?
Well, it should be that way in the same way the NCAA tournament has to do with units.
Right.
Where you get a team in, you get a unit. That team advances, you get another unit.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it works out is you then are able to say it is a meritocracy, but you know in the back of your head that the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have double the amount of teams of everyone else. And those teams are probably going to go farther than everyone else. And it's going to end up being a split that might be closer to a 50-30-20 situation.
That'd be fine then.
But that was my prediction. I don't know if they're going to be able to draw the line in the sand after the top 2 the same way that they drew a line in the sand after the Power 5 when they created the revenue distribution for the college football playoff. You know what's going to end up happening? It's going to get decided with some backroom deals during these conversations. I mean, this is, you know what the ACC is going to do? You know what its leg to stand on is? Don't raid us and we'll vote for less money.
No, because then in 12 years, Clemson will just leave, and Florida State will just leave, and Miami will just leave. So can't make any deals like that.